The ability to meet our deepest human needs really effectively can only come from a close relationship with God. Jesus spent entire nights in prayer to God, seeking out lonely places, but in the morning, he launched out into the towns and villages where the needs were.
Welcome to Mission 66, where Scripture meets real life. Today, John Matthews and Esther Sisulu are in the book of Deuteronomy, sharing insights from Pastor Luis Seau's teaching. Deuteronomy is a book that revisits God's covenant and offers guidance for faithful living. Download your study guide at mission66.org, and let's see what Deuteronomy still says to us today.
It's great to have you with us once again today as we look into the Old Testament book of Deuteronomy, chapters 10 and 11. And here we'll find Moses continuing his discourse to the people of Israel, reminding them not to forget where they came from and to move forward into the promised land, keeping the commands of God. And as we'll learn, their obedience will be for their own benefit, but as well as others. So here is our teacher, John Matthews, with the theme, Horizontal and Vertical Faith.
Esther, thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to Mission 66. So good to be with you wherever you join us from today as we journey through the book of Deuteronomy. And this book, is quoted more by Jesus during his earthly ministry than any other book. It's a compilation of several discourses which the prophet Moses was making to the people of Israel, to his people, before they went in to occupy the land of Canaan. And what he's doing is here reminding them of the covenant that God had made with the people of Israel all the way back to their father Abraham. And it talks about what their relationship with God should be like. Let's read. And the one speaking here, the person speaking, is Moses. At that time, the Lord said to me, "Cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and come up to me on the mountain and make an ark of wood. And I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets that you broke, and you shall put them in the ark." So I made an ark of acacia wood, and cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and went up the mountain with those 2 tablets in my hand. And God wrote on the tablets in the same writing as before the 10 commandments that the Lord had spoken to you on the mountain out of the midst of the fire on the day of the assembly. And the Lord gave them to me. Then I turned, came down from the mountain, and put the tablets in the ark that I had made. And there they are, as the Lord commanded me. Now these tablets of stone, let's keep in mind that the first tablets that contained the 10 commandments were blank tablets which Moses had chiseled out of the rock. He carried them with him up onto Mount Sinai, and whilst he was there 40 days and 40 nights, God supernaturally inscribed the 10 commandments on them. We could say it was done by the very finger of God. But when Moses came back down from Mount Sinai that first time and saw his people engaged in idolatry with the golden calf, he became so enraged at what he was seeing, at the sin that he saw, that he smashed the tablets on the ground. And there's something symbolic about that, because Moses broke the tablets just as the people had broken the law of God. And then Moses had to go back to intercede with God so that he would not destroy the people for what they had done. And now the stone tablets, well, they included these 10 commandments, which was the heart of the covenant between God and the people of Israel, the essence of all ethics and the guidance that God had provided the people with. But in today's chapter, we see God telling Moses to carve out another pair of tablets along with a wooden box made of acacia wood to carry them in and go back up Mount Sinai for another 40 days and 40 nights. And there, God rewrote the Ten Commandments on the tablets exactly the same as he had done before and as they were written before, word for word. And then Moses places them in the box, the Ark of the Covenant, which was kept in the tabernacle and went wherever the children of Israel went. Now, remember, our theme today is vertical and horizontal faith. And mankind's relationship to God is the vertical faith, as from earth to heaven. God reaches down to man, and we look up to him. That's the vertical. Chapter 10 also describes the death of Moses' brother Aaron. But as we skip ahead to verse 12, we see that God gave a few important guidelines in addition to what had been written on those tablets. And this is verse 12. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you, but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I am commanding you today for your good. Behold, to the Lord your God belongs heaven and the heaven of heavens, the earth with all that is in it. Yet the Lord set his heart in love on your fathers and chose their offspring after them, you above all peoples, as you are this day. Circumcise, therefore, the foreskin of your heart, and be no longer stubborn. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. He executes justice for the fatherless and the widow. He loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall fear the Lord your God. You shall serve him and hold fast to him, and by his name you shall swear. He is your praise. He is your God, who has done for you these great and terrifying things that your eyes have seen. Your fathers went down to Egypt, 70 people in all. And now, look, the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars of heaven. So we see that just as we have this vertical faith between man and God, we've also got to have horizontal faith, which has to do with our relationship with other people, with mankind. And it's all based on the knowledge that God will hold each of us accountable. God doesn't act with partiality, but he judges with perfect fairness, meaning he doesn't favour one over another. Verse 18 continues describing what should be our horizontal faith towards other people, and he defends the cause of the fatherless, the widow, and so should we. Love the sojourner, he says, for you yourselves were sojourners or travellers in Egypt. If you've ever been to a foreign country, you probably know how disorientating it can be at times. Can't speak the language, transitioning to a different culture. So what God is saying is treat strangers as you would want to be treated if you were a stranger. Now, chapter 11 is going to continue in the same line of thought as 10, emphasizing that God wants obedience as a manifestation of worship and love for him. And at the end of chapter 11, we see this relationship being marked by three aspects that are very clear. And they are true and honest worship, obedience marked by ethics, and also mercy and sensitivity towards those who are suffering. Verse 22, for if you will be careful to do all this commandment that I command you to do, loving the Lord your God, walking in all his ways and holding fast to him, then the Lord will drive out all these nations before you, and you will dispossess nations greater and mightier than you. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads shall be yours. Your territory shall be from the wilderness to the Lebanon, and from the river Euphrates, to the western sea. That is the Mediterranean. And that lets us know that the promised land of Canaan was actually a much larger territory than the modern boundaries of Israel. No one will be able to stand against you. Verse 26 continues, "See, I'm setting before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, and the curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside from the way that I'm commanding you today, to go after other gods that you have not known. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, you shall set the blessing on Mount Gerizim and the curse on Mount Ebal." These two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, represent the twofold face of God, that he blesses obedience, but he has to judge disobedience. Verse 30, "Are they not beyond the Jordan, west of the road, toward the going down of the sun, in the land of the Canaanites who live in the Arabah, opposite Gilgal, beside the oak of Moreh? For you are to cross over the Jordan, to go in and take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And when you possess it and live in it, you shall be careful to do all the statutes and the rules that I'm setting before you today." So the people have this decision, this big decision to make. Either you follow the one true God and worship him, obeying his commandments, seeking to have a life marked by justice and mercy, or reject him in favor of the lesser so-called gods, the Baals of Canaan. And it wasn't because God was an egotist that he needed this human worship to make him feel good. It's because it is only in God that truth, goodness, and perfect justice is found. And you know, God created us. He knows the path to forgiveness, to love, to freedom, and he knows that path is through his Son, Jesus, alone. But the pagan world that didn't know this God, well, they'd fallen and fell into terrible idolatry marked by all kinds of immorality, even the sacrifice of humans. So the worship of the God who has revealed himself through Moses is and must be both vertical and horizontal. Love the Lord your God with all your might. Love your neighbor. Both are important. Here's why. Vertical worship only, whilst ignoring our responsibility to other people, to our fellow mankind, well, that's not much good. The Apostle John wrote that if you don't love your brother or sister whom you can see, how really will you love God whom you can't see? And horizontal worship, spending all our time and resource trying to meet human need whilst ignoring the source of life, that vertical relationship with God, well, that won't work either.
Well, thanks for listening into Mission 66, and we're gaining some great biblical insights from our teacher, John Matthews. And I'm your host, Esther, and it's now time for us to get into some questions. And you know, John, Moses makes quite an interesting statement here in Deuteronomy 10:16. So what did he mean when he said, circumcise your heart?
And just as God gave Abraham and his descendants circumcision as a fleshly sign of his covenant, well, this same God also requires people to circumcise their hearts, for us to circumcise our hearts. It's a spiritual relationship that God desires of us, not just a list of outward duties which we must perform. So it's a throwing off of the old nature. It's a walking away from sin, from those things that have blighted us. It's a walking away from our sin and a constant walking towards Jesus Christ. It's cutting that off. He wants heart worship, not just going through the motions for show. He's not interested in that whatsoever. In fact, he had some stern words for the Pharisees when he was alive on earth, because they did exactly that. They went through the motions for show. That is not God's way.
Absolutely. And this is why today's theme is vertical and horizontal faith. And I know you talked about this somewhat, but let's go ahead and explore it further.
Yeah, let's do that. Well, look, I suppose there's often, isn't there, a tension between wanting to be faithful to God and wanting to serve other people, mankind. There are some concerned only with spirituality and the seeking of God in a deeper way, and that in many ways led to asceticism, or going to the mountaintop, withdrawing from society, monastic living. And ascetics believe that the world is so evil that it's a lost cause, and so they disengage from it. And you can't fault someone for wanting to grow deeper in their faith. It's a beautiful thing. But we also need to remember that whilst it's wonderful on the mountaintop with God, there is a whole world of human need down there in the valley, and we're called to reach out to them. And then you have other people who do, in a sense, the opposite. They consider Christianity only to be related to social justice and feeding the poor, but they will perhaps ignore that daily, closer, intimate walk with the Lord, from whence the power really comes to do those things, to do social justice and feed the poor with real Holy Spirit-driven love, grace, and connection. And again, nobody can fault those concerned with mercy, the feeding of the poor, providing for the immigrants, because they reflect God's heart, as well as being legitimate needs. But, our ability to meet those human needs really effectively can only come from a close relationship with God. The horizontal doesn't exclude the vertical. Jesus gives us the perfect example of how to balance both. He spent entire nights in prayer to God, seeking out lonely places for that intimate devotional walk with his Father. That was his vertical worship. But in the morning, he launched out into the towns and villages where there was so much need. That was his horizontal worship.
So then, John, in chapter 11, verse 26, Moses begins talking about how God is setting before the people both a blessing and a curse. And I think most of us can relate to God being a God of blessing. But does God really curse people?
Well, Esther, I think most people don't have a good understanding of God, and I include myself in that, because God and his way is the truth. We tend oftentimes not to like the truth, but in reality, when we get away from truth, we are left with what? With lies. And instead of life comes death and destruction. So God is on our side, and his moral law is for our good. It's for us. It's our benefit. A child may want to run out into traffic, but good father knows that it's dangerous to do that, and so will restrain that child's impulses because he loves them, doesn't want them to get hurt or to die. And we sometimes perceive God as someone trying to ruin our fun, or when we sin, we perhaps imagine that God is some bearded, grandfatherly old man in heaven smiling down on his wayward children, overlooking and forgetting our faults, but he not really wanting to do anything about them. That wasn't the way that Moses pictured God. He knew that God wanted the best for his children, And that is why he commands them to obey him and walk in the truth. That was the path of blessing. That was the path of freedom. Even though sometimes that's not initially what we perceive it as. And he knew that if Israel turned aside to lies and deception, what might more obviously look like a path of freedom, but actually was the opposite. What was the result? Well, it would be a curse. And whose responsibility was that? It was their responsibility, not God's.
All right, well, just one last question here on verse 24, John, because it says, every place where you set your foot will be yours. So what does this mean? Could it mean that Israel has the God-given right to the entire land between the Euphrates and the Mediterranean?
Well, Esther, the extent of land that God had given Israel in this covenant with Abraham are actually a bit imprecise. For example, it talks about Lebanon, which was not the same country as modern-day Lebanon. According to some scholars, Moses was speaking from the top of a mountain, Mount Nebo, looking down toward Lebanon, which was in front of him. Now, when Israel reached its pinnacle, and that was during the time of King David and King Solomon, well, Lebanon was not included in the land, and the dimensions of this land described here in Deuteronomy were actually fulfilled during the time of David and Solomon. So the question, I guess, is whether or not Israel has a right to the limits of the land as defined in David's day. And that is very much open to discussion by the scholars, whether this land should be perpetually given to Israel and whether this will be fulfilled indeed in the future. We can't be 100% sure of what the exact extent of the promised land should be. Look, at any rate, these biblical passages, without doubt, should not be used to justify war. The words of Jesus usurp any such notion. And he said, love your enemies. If this is a prophecy that will be fulfilled in the future with the land reaching once again the extension that it had in the time of David, then God in his wisdom, he will make it happen without the help of scholars or politicians or indeed armies.
Well, thanks, John. This was a great study. How should we conclude what we've learned today?
After having studied then chapters 10 and 11 of the book of Deuteronomy, Esther, we see God cutting 2 new stone tablets containing the 10 commandments, which were effectively replicas of those that had been smashed by Moses. And God called on the Israelites to circumcise their hearts, meaning the worship of God is a heart issue. And then chapter 11 is a call to love and serve the Lord, who had done so much for the people of Israel. And our theme was vertical and horizontal faith. Walk in faithfulness towards God above and walk in fairness towards our neighbour who's beside us. Love God first. Love our neighbour as ourselves. On these 2, said Jesus, hangs the entire law and the prophets.
Well, thank you so much, dear friend, for joining us today on Mission 66. And hey, if you have a question or you want to leave a comment on this episode, simply find us on Facebook and Instagram at Mission 66. Just type that in the search line. Well, I'm Esther, and for John and our team, we look forward to joining you again next time. Until then, God bless you.
Has God used today's program in your life? Then you'll want to receive the free study guide that's waiting for you on our website. You can get it right away by downloading it at mission66.org. At mission66.org, you can also leave a comment or make a donation to help this listener-supported ministry. When you give, you're helping listeners experience solid Bible teaching in many languages in some of the most spiritually resistant places in the world. Thank you for helping at mission66.org. Mission 66 is a ministry of Transworld Radio.